Okay, it's day 155. I'm going to start with The Guardian talking about the daily events. Barrage of 25 missiles fired on Russian forces, or fired by Russian forces at northern regions of Ukraine from Belarus. This happened once before, and it's happening again. Governor of Mykolaiv said on the morning of July 28th, massive rocket attack in Mykolaiv. Strikes were coordinated to hit while they celebrated Statehood Day for the first time. Statehood Day is a new holiday they instituted last year to be celebrated for the first time this year, ironically. Restless morning again, said Zelensky. Again, missile terror. We will not give up. We will not give up. Do not intimidate us. Ukraine is an independent, free, indivisible state, and it will always be like that. But this rocket fire keeps coming from everywhere. In the meantime, Russian forces are undertaking a massive redeployment of troops to the south from the east. So, and this is corroborated here, British Ministry of Defense, Ukraine's counteroffensive in Kherson is gathering momentum. Kherson City, the most politically significant population center occupied Russia, is now virtually cut off from the other occupied territories. Its loss would severely undermine Russia's attempt to paint the occupation as a success. So they have to redeploy over to Kherson just because of that. Again, Russian airstrikes. This is Radio Free Europe in Ukrainian region of Khorvad. July 28th, Russian strikes hit the city of, I can't pronounce that, and I'm not even going to try to. It also hit regions in Kiev, Cherniv, Mykolaiv, Kharkiv. So there's missile strikes all over. This is what Russia does just before an important meeting or an important event, just trying to like somehow show, see, we can still do this to you. Again, and Kuleba, was he a foreign minister, whatever he is, high-ranking official, linked the assaults to the day of statehood. So same kind of thing. There's also been heavy shelling across the entire front line in Donetsk. And again, this is British ministry update as well. Okay. Next, Russia inflicts 44 airstrikes in Ukraine since the start of July. So today is July 28th. Since the beginning of July, Russian Federation has launched 49 missile and 44 airstrikes. That doesn't mean 49 missiles total. That means 49 missile strikes. So if they send 6 in that strike, we're not counting all that, just the particular strikes. Since the beginning of the month, the enemy has carried out 49 strikes, 44 airstrikes, as a result of which 28 objects were completely destroyed, including, and what did they destroy? Military objects? No, no, no. I mean, they did hit some military targets, but in general, they're they're not really just focused on that. They say they are, but they're not. Including 4 schools, 9 residential buildings, 137 objects were partially destroyed, including 7 transport infrastructure facilities, 11 educational institutions, 29 residential buildings. If they are trying to hit military targets, they're really bad at this. So that's what's going on in Ukraine. Lots of missiles. So since the operational pause after the capture of Severodonetsk and its sister city Lysychansk, and they took this kind of pause, they've been using missiles to kind of fill the vacuum. Now, why are they pausing? Well, there's a reason, and that's the topic for today. Half of Russian troops sent in Ukraine have been killed or injured. This is not me making this up. This is the Telegraph in Britain. Okay? Now, and they have some backing for this. According to U.S. intelligence, casualties have rocketed to more than 75,000. How did they get to that figure? Okay, more than 75,000 soldiers have been killed or injured, a loss equivalent to almost the entire British Army. Now, get your mind around that. Okay. Now, again, the Biden administration officials told House lawmakers today in the classified briefing that 75 plus thousand Russian officials or Russians have been killed or wounded since the ongoing war in Ukraine began. But losses on such a scale would help to explain why Russian advance in Donbass has been grinding so slowly, why so many troops are refusing to fight, and why Moscow is having to rely on fresh volunteers. And all those things are happening. They got through the Donbass, and after getting through this battle in Donbass, it just kind of stopped, and they just started shooting missiles, and that's what they were doing daily. Now, the estimate was between 15,000 and 20,000 Russian troops have been killed, which would broadly be in line with the estimates of a 3-to-1 ratio of death to injuries. Now, The Zelensky administration says it's closer to 40,000 Russians killed. I don't know whether that's accurate or not, but let's say it's only 15 or 20,000 killed. If true, the new classified figures would make Ukraine Moscow's worst ever war in terms of casualties. Think about that. Worst ever war in terms of casualties. In the Soviet Union suffered nearly 70,000 casualties. Here we're talking about 75,000, including around 15,000 killed in Afghanistan. That was 10 years of fighting. What they did in 5 months in Ukraine, it took 10 years in Afghanistan. So it's bad. CIA director estimated that 60,000 Russian soldiers had been killed or injured. Some estimates have gone as high as 60,000 or 80,000 casualties. So killed and injured together, at least 60,000, as high as 80,000. They're saying here roughly 75,000. And yeah, it's bad. Um, the Russia's last reported death toll at the end of March was only 13. This was a laughable. This was a month into the fighting, and they said, yes, we've had 1,351 killed in battle. Now, 1,351 after a month. You do the math and think whether that even makes any sense. And the first month was like really hot fighting, so that didn't make sense at all. At that point, we're looking at probably 5, 10, something in that neighborhood. It was pretty significant already. All right. And if you take into account the 200 fatalities a day admitted by Ukraine, you're talking about 350 a day on both sides. Now, so just think about the math. Ukraine's admitting that they're losing 100 to 200, and in some days there was roughly 200 fatalities a day. And then if you do the math about that, and you're looking at some significant casualties. If you sustain that rate for over a year, you'll be reaching the levels of the Franco-Prussian or Crimean War of the 1850s. Like, that's crazy bad. So that's what's going on. And I think that, like, look, the Telegraph isn't just making this up. This was what the American congressmen are being briefed by Biden officials who are tracking what's going on. So it's very, very bad. That's why you've seen such a huge operational pause. Okay, in other news, Russian TV journalist who protested on the air was fined for discrediting the army. This is what's going on in Russia. You have no free speech. You can't say anything against the army or you're going to get fined or jailed. Russian TV journalist Maria Osankova, known for her online anti-war protest, has been convicted of discrediting the country's armed forces in social media posts, condemning Moscow's actions in Ukraine. You can't do that because you get fined or go to jail. The judge court ordered fine Osanakova 50,000 rubles or $822 in her social media posts. She staged a single picket against the backdrop of the Kremlin, unfurling a poster with the inscription, "Putin is a murderer, his soldiers are fascists." Several days later, she was arrested. Okay, arrested for that. Like, it's even hard to believe. She's also the one who burst onto the set of Channel 1 holding a poster that read, "Stop the war, don't believe the propaganda, they're lying to you," and shouted, "Stop the war, no to war." And she was fined then 30,000 rubles for doing that. So that's what's going on in Russia. There's no freedom of speech. They passed a bill that said that it's illegal to say anything that is against the state line or speaking bad against Russian troops. Okay, Russia attracts forces openly professing neo-Nazi ideology to participate in hostilities. Now, this is by Interfax Ukraine, so I took it with a little bit of a grain of salt, going, okay, let's look at this. But watch, okay? Just I'm trying to be careful and look against who might be biased on which side. Okay, the Russian Federation attracts so-called Imperial Legion forces that openly profess neo-Nazi ideology and are included in the list of particularly dangerous terrorist organizations, says Deputy Defense Minister of Ukraine Okay, so she's the Deputy Defense Minister of Ukraine saying this. So I have to carefully weigh the charge. The leadership of the Russian Federation is trying urgently to resume combat capabilities and formations, and so they're taking pretty much anyone. I've seen articles where they were taking people out of jail. They're paying people 3, 4 times what the normal going rate is in order to get to, to fill up the ranks of the army. So the Imperial Legion, I had to look up the Imperial Legion. I wasn't familiar with it. So here we go. This is I Googled it. Here's the Washington Post. Now, this is the Washington Post. Look at the date, April 13th, 2020. No axe to grind against what's going on in Russia now. They're just kind of reporting things that are interesting around the world. Inside the white supremacist Russian imperial movement, designated a foreign terrorist organization by the U.S. State Department. Huh? Okay, this was 2 years ago. Has nothing to do with the invasion way before that. When the State Department designated Russian white supremacist group, the Russian imperialist movement, as a terrorist entity this month, some supporters saw it as an honor. Like this guy. Well, who's this guy? Well, this guy, his name is Igor Grikin. Now, that name rang a bell because and I wrote about this in my book, and as I was updating the book, Igor Grikin was critical of Moscow because taking Severodonetsk and Lysychansk cost the Russians way too many soldiers because they spent their time just taking a city and losing soldiers, just sending them into the wood chipper. And he was critical about it. And I cited him in the book, having no idea. I knew he was a soldier in Donbass in 2014, but I didn't know this backstory at the time. Okay, one of the first to congratulate organizations after the U.S. terrorist designation on April 6 was Igor Girkin, a former Russian intelligence officer charged with murder by Dutch authorities for the downing of the Malaysian Airlines Flight 17. Do you remember that? That was in 2014. And that was a big international to-do. It was the Russians that caused this. It was a big thing. Girkin, who calls himself Igor Striklov, played a key role in Russia's annexation of Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula in 2014 and was commander and defense minister in the separatist region of Donetsk. Okay, so he's a bad dude, but what's even worse is that he's a neo-Nazi. Okay, since 2014, I'd say this Russian imperialist movement has been posing an increasing threat to European societies. Let's go down a little bit further. This is a long article. The 2014 RIM's paramilitary wing, the Imperial Legion. That's what we're talking about. Imperial Legion, right? Yeah. Fought in the eastern Ukraine on the side of pro-Russian separatists. Mind blown. So the Imperial Legion are these neo-Nazis that are going into Ukraine to cleanse Ukraine of neo-Nazis. That's the story here, and it's absolutely fascinating. Okay, a couple other articles. U.S. Senate passes a resolution to label Russia a state sponsor of terrorism. And this is in the Senate, unanimously approved the resolution of the Secretary of State for the death of countless innocent men, women, and children, according to the New York Times. Our armed forces of the Russian Federation have committed numerous summary executions against innocent civilians, have attempted to cover their atrocities with mass graves across Ukraine, says the Senate bill. So, wow, that's actually going to happen, it looks like. Bakyar, whatever this is, the drone company. So the Lithuanians crowdsourced it, and then the crowdsourced buying a drone cost $3 million or $5 million, something like that. So they crowdsourced one. Then some other country crowdsourced one. Then the Poles now crowdsourced one. And after each one, the Bakyar company gave the drone, said, give the money to humanitarian release. So that's 3 drones for Ukraine and all the money for humanitarian relief that has gone to that. And it's a big story. That's pretty classy, Bakyar. Zelensky expects toughening sanctions, no doubt. But here, if you can disconnect the banks from SWIFT and all the Russian banks, that things grind to a halt. And I don't know why we haven't done that in the first 6 packages of sanctions. Like, if sanctions are going to work, why don't you do all these things like in February rather than now? But this is just a process. Okay. Zelensky also says he's going to do everything to start talks on EU membership as quickly as possible. Now, nobody thought he would get this far. So moving it forward, all we have to do with this, we will do synchronized legislation of Ukraine with the law of the European Union. We'll do it. We've come to the conclusion that our system is institutionally becoming Europe, and we've begun the process of de-oligarchization, and they have done that. And they're passing bills like unanimously, even with opposition parties just trying to get this through. So I think that they're going to join the European Union sooner than later. That's just my opinion from my observation. Zelensky says that the dependent and unfree Ukraine isn't Ukraine. This is his quote. The great people of a great country and a great state that has existed on earth since ancient times, which has been tried to enslave and destroy since ancient times, many and many times, and which ancient times did not allow this to be done, never to anyone. Now, he's talking in his video address, and he said, the state in which the history of Christianity in Eastern Europe began when 1,034 years ago it was Christianized by great Kiev Prince Volodymyr. And he says, quoted this, every day, this is his conclusion, every day we are fighting so that everyone on the planet finally understands we are not a colony, not an enclave, not a protectorate, not a province, not a part of foreign empires, not lands in the composition, not a union republic, not an autonomy, not a province, but a free, independent, sovereign, indivisible, and independent state. Go Zelensky. I mean, that's exactly right. And this was on the day of Ukrainian independence, or whatever the name of the special occasion today is. And this was the first day that this would be celebrated, because it was passed last year, well before we got anywhere near a war. Okay, so I conclude these usually with some bits from Pravda or RT, because it's always fun to see what the Russians are saying about in Pravda, what they're saying to their own people, the propaganda. Here, Global Times revealed a mistake of 20 years ago that the U.S. repeats in Ukraine. Well, what's that? By pumping weapons into Kyiv, the American leadership believes that they're repeating the Afghan success. Okay, but they're confusing this, because they said the result of 20-year occupation by the United States of Afghanistan was that American troops had to be withdrawn from the country, abandoning recent allies. Okay, the Americans did withdraw. They withdrew in a bad way. But the pumping uh, weapons into Afghanistan was in the 80s to the Mujahideen, so that they could fight the Russians. This had very little to do with what was going on here. And the Russians seem to have, I don't know, confused those two wars, the one in the 80s and the one in the 2001 forward. Um, but nonetheless, and this was the whole article. I mean, that's the size of the whole article, but this is what the Russian population is reading, which is very sad to see. Okay, Russian senator reveals when Russia might consider integrating new territories as of the fall. This guy wants to, he's working on the topic in the upcoming session. Quote, I fully admit that the most important task in the autumn session of this year as Parliament will be the integration of new territories into the legal space of the Russian Federation. Like, he's open about it. Like, we're just going to annex Donbass, and we're going to annex Kherson, and we're going to, right? Like, that's what he's planning to do. Prior to this Russian senator said that Kyiv's threats to attack the Crimean Bridge once again showed the need for denazification and demilitarization of the entire country. So it's not just taking the eastern region, it's taking the entire country. And he's saying that in spite of this, the white supremacist legion that they're pulling together, right? Like, I mean, how they can say this with a straight face is absolutely fascinating. Okay, last one. Sanctions on, this is RT, Russian television. Sanctions on Russia could leave Britain without fish and chips. Okay, so what they're saying, around 5,000 of Britain's 10,000 fish and chip shops, like fish and chips in Britain apparently are like hamburger stands in the United States. It's pretty predominant. Okay, 10,000 of these could be shut, or 5,000 of these could be shut down because of soaring prices for ingredients and energy caused by sanctions imposed on Russia. Well, yes and no. So the sanctions are exacerbating a worldwide inflationary crisis, largely caused initially by COVID and then the actions to deal with COVID, and then inflamed by the sanctions. But it's not just that. The situation had become worse after the authorities decided to slap a 35% tariff on seafood from Russia. Okay, so that did inflame it. Around a third of Britain's whitefish comes from Russia. In order to stay afloat, shops have to replace the traditional cod and haddock with hake and other cheaper types of fish. This was an issue here. The head of the National Federation of Fishermen's Organizations says the current situation provides a big opportunity to increase North Sea catches, such as haddock and whiting. Yeah, that's what they'll need to do. They'll just shift gears, and it'll take a little time. But the inflationary measure is not without pain, and the inflation is partly due to sanctions in the West, affecting Russia, affecting the West. Like one affects the other, which affects it back. But that is all that RT seems to say. Like if you watch RT, and I would urge you to do so, go to RT on Rumble. Go to Rumble, like look that app up, and then look through to because that's about the only place that I can actually find it. It's been banned in many places. But I watch it because I want to understand, like, what are the Russians actually thinking? What's on their television? And you can watch English language Russian television, and they talk about this all the time. Western sanctions are hurting the West, and they keep going on about it. Well, they're going on about it because it's hurting Russia. Okay, that's all that I have for Thursday, July 28th. Thank you for your time, and I'll see you tomorrow.